Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David LeBon, and I am President and Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. APA is a national nonprofit organization located in Washington, D.C., serving prosecutors as well as their law enforcement and community partners. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Today's webinar is on the implementation of prosecutorial performance indicators, or what we call PPIs. PPIs are an effective tool to increase prosecutorial transparency and efficiency. The focus of today's webinar is specifically on office-wide engagement. The webinar is made possible by the support of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation for Safety and Justice Challenge. We are fortunate enough to be joined by two wonderful speakers. The Honorable Jason Rogers Williams was sworn in as the District Attorney of the Orleans Parish on January 11th of 2021. He attended Tulane Law School and soon after starting his own law practice focused on criminal defense. After winning a series of high-profile criminal cases, the Louisiana Supreme Court appointed Jason to serve as a judge on the New Orleans Criminal District Court. In 2014, he saw an opportunity to begin trying to make government work for the people of New Orleans and ran for city council. He was a council member for 6 years, 4 of which he served as a council president, before being elected district attorney on a promise of sweeping justice reforms. Today, we are also joined by Dr. Bisiki, and I am not going to attempt to pronounce Bisiki.
Yes, you should.
Thank you, sir, but no, Dr. Bisiki K. Of the Florida International University, who specializes in performance indicators and prosecutorial discretion. Prior to his appointment at FIU, Dr. K was the founding research director at the Institute for State and Local Governance, also known as ISLG, and the research director for the Prosecution and Racial Justice Program of the Vera Institute of Justice. The speakers will discuss ways to maximize office-wide engagement and foster an office culture of data use for successful PPI implementation. The presenters will share their insights and expertise on developing an effective rollout strategy for staff engagement, capitalize on existing staff buy-in, and of course, to garner the support for the PPI initiative. This webinar is the third in a series of webinars focused on PPI implementation. They will be taking place on the final Thursday of the month. Our next session will be on October 28th at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. That session being on community engagement. Please save the date and we will be sending out the registration information for that webinar shortly. For today's webinar, the presenters encourage attendees to ask questions throughout the course of the presentation. You will be able to submit questions for our speakers using the question function on your toolbar located at the bottom of your screen. If you need additional assistance, please contact us at APA directly. At this point, I'm going to hand this over to you, Bisiki. And before we begin on the presentation and also hear from DA Williams, do you want to tell the audience a little bit, and probably that 30,000-foot view, what are the PPIs, what are the performance indicators, and what brought you and I have had a relationship of probably almost 15 years. Mm-hmm. What's brought you into criminal justice and then prosecution, and then how does all of this make prosecutors better?
Wow, incredible. Thank you so much for that generous introduction, David. It's my pleasure to be back. It's my second or third webinar with the APA. I like the focus of your organization and the incredible group of prosecutors you have assembled across the country. So I do appreciate this opportunity. I also want to mention quickly that we started the work in New Orleans very recently, and we are implementing prosecutorial performance indicators in partnership with ANH Datalytics, and we're also working very closely on the ground with the Vera Institute of Justice's New Orleans office. So it's a great group of individuals that comes together to help improve the prosecutorial performance and meet the expectations of the communities. With respect to your first question, I think this audience probably has now some sense of what the PPIs are, but I'd like to say that the PPIs are prosecutorial performance indicators, which is a set of 55 data points or metrics that assess prosecutorial performance over time of the individual officers and not individual prosecutors. So we collect data on a monthly and quarterly basis towards broader goals and objectives that really go beyond traditional measures of success, which are, conviction rate or trial experience, and looks into broader issues of community health and well-being, serving victims, engaging with the communities, racial and ethnic disparities, prosecutorial ethics and integrity, minimizing unnecessary punitiveness, as well as how the capacity of the office can drive those changes on a monthly basis. So we work closely with the data team in individual offices. Wherever there are no data teams, we identify local partners and develop the monthly statistics that can inform the office how they do their work and can help them connect the dots, if you will, between decision-making and the impact on the ground, but also can inform the communities about the developments within their prosecutor's office. So we have initially started the work in 4 jurisdictions, and now we have expanded to up to 20. There is an incredible appetite for this work. We receive emails very frequently from prosecutors. And as you know, 15 and 20 years ago, prosecutors reaching out to researchers about data would have been unheard of. I think a combination of the community interest in data and researchers wanting to work more closely with the prosecutors, as well as the philanthropy willing to invest into practitioner researcher community partnerships, we see the change in the prosecutorial culture where the appetite for data is growing. And we will be seeing this at all levels, including at the federal level, where there is a lot of discussion about how to reform prosecutorial system. I'm not sure I answered all your questions, but please interrupt.
I know I did that too, but I also kind of think as we look today at Engage in the Office, first, I'm going to just throw out that broad question. Why should prosecutors care about data? And then you mentioned the researchers, the public. Does that just apply to the elected or the chief prosecutor? Or should the line prosecutors be caring about data? And how about the mid-level managers? How about the supervisors? Why this change towards data? And especially someone like yourself who is so good at looking at the data and then that guidance. So who should care?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, because when we go into the offices, we often interview prosecutors, line prosecutors, mid-level managers. And sometimes you hear that whether it's a community engagement or understanding the research or collecting data, it's a job of the elected or the executive team working with the data people. But it's not the job of the line prosecutor or division chief to think about the data and trends. You hear this every now and then still, but I think that sentiment is slowly changing. It depends on the elected. I think that as the new leaders take offices across the country, they do send a message that we cannot continue the work the way we've been doing this work for decades through incarceration and punishment. We need to be smart on how we think about addressing the needs of the community, and the punishment is not always the solution. So the researchers come into play here, and chief prosecutors, electeds, often send a message to the across the office that it's no longer be the case where the executives make the decisions and they're blindly implemented across all levels. Now we need everyone to contribute to building the new offices, new prosecutorial systems, new practices that are responsive to community needs. So I think the top to bottom approach is slowly fading away to create the opportunities for prosecutors of all levels to start thinking critically about the overall impact and help develop the meaningful policies and practices. So in a sense, we don't expect the line prosecutors to listen to the data, researchers, and go and change the how they make the decisions, but there is an expectation that they will escalate some of the conversations to the executive team, help develop new policies, and then once there is an office-wide policy adopted, they implement these policies. Because it can be a dangerous trend if individual prosecutors start looking at some data, some research, and now start changing the decisions at any given day. So I think that is something very clearly communicated in every office where we work.
Yeah. And I think your point about change, new prosecutors, or I even just say look at it a generation or two later. You and I have been in this work a long time. The new prosecutors coming out of law school, they'd like to know the why. Why am I doing something? And am I making a difference? And most particularly, what is a better way to find out than using that data, following that data? And then the other piece you mentioned, having a researcher or letting a university come into your office. You've had a long history of working well with prosecutors, but what's the advice out there about going out and reaching out, especially if you've got a university within your jurisdiction?
Absolutely. I think this model where you are sitting somewhere in the academia or ivory tower and you tell the prosecutors how to work across the country and improve relationships with the communities, I don't know how sustainable that is. We always, every time the office reaches out to us, the first thing we tell them, are there strong local partners who can help you implement the reforms, help you understand the decision-making, help you conduct research, help you engage with the communities. And if there are no local partners, which in most cases there are local partners, we step in. But in very common, we partner with the local partners to support the DA as much as possible. So I think that researcher, community, prosecutorial partnership only makes sense if we build something that's sustainable. So after the funding runs out, these important strategies and initiatives do not disappear.
And DA Williams, we were just talking a little bit about Basiki, about this whole concept of inviting a researcher, inviting a university to come in and look at your office. What you got elected, and congratulations. In January, you stepped in and you've hit the ground running. But what was your interest in with the PPIs? Why would you let somebody like Basiki and his team come into your office, and what do you hope by it?
Number one, from a selfish standpoint, this is an excellent tool when you talk about prosecuting a different way. The New Orleans District Attorney's Office, like probably most prosecutors' offices around the country, for decades and decades has prided itself on locking up as many people as they could for this, just for numbers, to show statistics without any sort of real metrics for measuring public safety. And so I think our office now stands out among some of the other offices to the degree that we are not just following that superficial tough on crime approach. And our city, New Orleans, literally was the most incarcerated place on the planet per capita. And that stems from in no small part to the punitive practices of my predecessors. So in order to turn that ship in the midst of the amount of fear mongering that certainly exists in the criminal legal system world, having a tool like PPI, having a way of measuring whether or not we're having the intended consequences that that are set out, or whether or not this is some bold, crazy experiment. The data will show it for our staff internally, and the data will show it externally. And I think, I believe that PPI is what will convince other offices who want to reform this work to go that direction.
And I think before we get into it more, I think the way you came into office is quite a story. It's not that unusual for a defense lawyer to get elected DA. What is a little unusual is most then DAs then run for mayor, right? Or run for some other office instead of, in your situation, there you were council president.
Yeah.
So you're the ones kind of with the purse strings of looking at the, not kind of, likely had the purse strings, looking over at the prosecutor's office and saying, why are they doing that? Is that better for safety? So before we get into how you engage in and work on things internally, because that is the subject we're trying to do here, how do you get your office itself moving towards a common direction? Do you mind sharing a little bit that sort of external view and what it's like to be sitting on the outside and really questioning, why are we doing what it is we're doing?
It's extremely helpful. So I did 2 terms as council president in the city of New Orleans. And so it's not, I wasn't just looking at the DA's budget, but I was looking at the police department's budget, sewage and water board's budget, what we were putting into parks and programs for kids, what we were putting in terms of infrastructure. And it became really clear that over the course of a couple of decades, we grew the budgets for jails, for DAs, for police, without asking for any data in return about whether or not we were getting more public safety benefits for the amount of dollars we were spending. And so there other than stimulus money from the federal government, there typically isn't new money for municipalities, right? So you've got to take it from somewhere in order for it to go somewhere else. So we were really scrubbing the budget at the city council every single year, trying to figure out how we could invest. We invested in early childhood ed for kids to the tune of close to $2 million. No other municipality had done that, but we were required to really start asking tough questions of other agencies, departments, and other elected officials. And the DA's office was one of those areas that had grown its budget, but really was not delivering a better work product, right? We had more people in jail, but we still had rising crime rates, violent crime rates. And so that really gave me a very unique perspective about how we were going to spend money when we got here and how we would show it to the city council when we were back there for budget time. And PPI, I guarantee you a lot of the information that's coming from them is what is going to be a part of that city council budget presentation.
Outstanding. And I know, I think I've taken up some of Basiki's time. He's actually not sharing his screen at the moment. So Basiki, back to you, because I know you've got a framework for engaging that, but
yeah,
DA Williams, thank you, because yours is quite a story, and boy, your office has been through change, and it's just been a few months. So
so I do think that most of the presentation will be made by DA Williams, because we just recently had an introductory meeting with the staff. I'll just start by saying that if we are thinking about adopting the PPIs, we always tell the people, meet with your staff internally, have a good understanding what the purpose of the project is, why you are doing this, how this is going to benefit them. Let's be honest, prosecutors are understaffed, overworked, underpaid, underappreciated. If there is any criticism, it's an easy target to, why would they take on an extra project when they already have their hands full? So it's a really, really tough sell. And we just experienced this even in the office where we have the leadership committed to the data-driven reforms, because it's not that people are questioning the importance of doing the racial disparity analysis, or people are questioning becoming smarter at building healthier communities, but the prosecutors are simply overwhelmed by their workload and they have no support staff. So how the office like this can sell the idea of the new partnership and of the new research? And I'm not saying that this is going to be one day where everything is going to change and you're going to, change people's minds about the value of the data and overcome skepticism around data. It's a process, but it has to start somewhere. And starting on the right foot is a very important first step. So in the office, DA Williams, please interrupt me as I'm talking about this based on your recollection about what happened that day. I would appreciate that. So we have to make the initial introduction and explain the PPI framework office-wide. And we obviously need to identify data ambassadors in each office. So it's very easy to find within the field of prosecution, data skeptics or even data phobes. And you don't have to look very hard for those people that will be in the office, because the prosecutorial system was not built on the ideals of the data and transparency or even community relations. But it's much harder to identify ambassadors. And the ambassadors are people who have this reputation within their office. Many of them can be career prosecutors. In fact, it's ideal that somebody is a career prosecutor who says that this is important, then this is how we can benefit from this. Prosecutors are skeptical if you just get data people explaining the value of this. So it's quite important to find the allies, because no single person, DA or state attorney or Commonwealth attorney or who, whatever we call the elected or appointed position, no single person can change the culture where data culture takes over punitive culture. That does take more than one person, more than a day, a month, or a year. So that's an important component of this. Then developing the realistic strategy that is time-bound and explicit about staff roles and responsibilities. What I mean by that, it has to become somebody's job. As you know, and you know better than anyone, you know, David, you used to be a DA, and Jason, you are a DA now. You know, to make anything happen, it has to become somebody's job. Because if you make something everyone's responsibility, then it's kind of no one's job. So I'm not saying at the end of the year, this person's performance has to be measured exactly what they have accomplished on the PPI end, but it probably will not hurt if that's a part of that conversation. So senior person appointed to lead the data-driven reforms, who can coordinate among multiple partners, because offices that sign up for PPIs have also probably signed up for some other research projects, some other community partnership. So it's important there is a one person that understands how these different groups can come together to provide the meaningful support without stepping on people's toes and without confusing internal stuff. Dave Williams, can I pause here? I'm wondering if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I would just add, you know, it is really hard for people to do things differently. Change in any business or any agency is always very tough. You know, a lot of people use the term progressive prosecutor, but you don't see those terms used in the medical field. Progressive doctor. If one of us had a brain tumor and we had to have surgery, we would want the doctor using the best practices that science has to offer for 2021, not what someone said worked in 1965, right? So, and that applies to how the office is managed and performance measurements. And PPI, I think, really structures this plan in a way that allows you, whatever your mission is, it makes it really clear that these are tools to do the job better and to measure what your outputs are. And so, yeah, I'm a DA, but in any endeavor, you want to make sure you're being successful.
Wonderful. And you know, David and Jason, sorry, I keep going from the DA Williams to Jason to DA Williams. I apologize for that.
Let's stick with Jason.
Let's stick with Jason.
I'll respond easier to that.
That way I will not force you to pronounce my last name and call me Professor Pidatelate. So that's only fair, I suppose.
Professor K.
So you know what I want to do next? I want to skip one slide and show what are the most typical pushbacks that we have received from the prosecutors. So obviously, we're not going to go into the office if the DA and the executive team have not bought into the idea of transparency, data, examining racial disparities and publishing about this, no matter how terrible the findings are, and developing the metrics to inform the communities. But you often get the pushback from the prosecutors at various levels of the office. So on the list here, is there anything you can relate to or something that is missed in terms of what are some of the skepticisms that you would encounter as you are selling the idea of data and transparency to the prosecutors?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'll start at the bottom of the list. A phrase I've said often. I think I actually said it to a professor in law school in business enterprise. I hate math. It's why I went to law school. And working with PPI doesn't mean that a lawyer has to all of a sudden become a statistician. It does not mean that you've got to all of a sudden understand how to what to do with the data once it's collected. And that was it's a bit of a tough sell because we are very busy. Our lawyers are working weekends, they're working late nights, and they want to make sure they can perform well in court. And I want them to. And PPI has a system that is not intrusive and doesn't do harm to the time management or the lack of time that my lawyers already have, right? And then the other piece of it, when you say this idea, we don't have time for this. We all say we don't have time for things on a very, very regular basis. We don't have time to work out, right? But that's probably one of the most important ones when you think about it, because if you don't make time for certain things, then it can cause serious harm to your body or to the body of the DA's office long term. We are plagued by a number of lawsuits that have cost the city and the DA's office millions of dollars because of not adhering to their Brady obligation in terms of turning evidence over. And there's, I think, an assumption for a lot of people that there is one nefarious person who is hiding things purposefully in these cases. But when you look at them across the country and in my office, it was more negligence. It was more lack of systems, lack of appropriate data management, people saying they didn't have time to do it. That caused it far more than an evil person trying to convict the wrong person. And so you really don't have time not to do it once you realize how easy it is to do.
Great. So David, you want me to continue with the sort of specific strategies about how to sell the idea of the PPIs internally?
I do. I think you've touched very, very well, and I'm glad that, and we'll call him Jason now instead of DA Williams, the discussion of it's not just your office. This is a national issue, and the piece that's happened in my mind, it's also the training issue, right? One is, you know, do you have the information? The second is what if anything do you do with it? Mm-hmm. And I love what you said about that sort of negligence. Well, if you have constant turnover, things are coming from all different directions. Of course, you're going to end up with this list, because this list means I don't have to change, right? I think that everything's fine in my job. And I don't think you can say anywhere in this country that there's the office that doesn't need to change. And now you've got the COVID issues, and now you've got all these backlogs. So we need to be more efficient, and we need to be more targeted. So to me, Basiki, I think that does come down to what is the strategy of engaging the office. I always use the phrase, what's in it for me? That change management is so much easier if they say, here's the benefit. So here's all these problems. Basiki, how do they get answered? And then especially with an office, once you get it organized and targeted, think how much better you can do on the cases that are important, the cases that are going towards public safety, the increase in violence we're seeing. How do we try to stem that tide and do well there? And the discussion also, what about our customers? What about our victims? Do we have time to get and work with them? So Basiki, I think, yes, here are the problems. Now, how do we solve it, and where do we take it?
Yeah, and you know, on that point, David, I don't believe in the idea that you go into the office and you tell people what you've been doing for years, it's fundamentally wrong. And there is something wrong with you and it has to change. I think there has to be some type of balance that you have to strike, explaining what are the things that worked and what are the things that can be improved and need to improve. Otherwise, I don't think you're gonna get the people on board with this. Even with this sort of soft strategies that we have, soft powers or weapons, it does take 3 to 4 years to build that data culture. And when you go to the offices, people tell you we don't have data, and there is a understanding that the data is the problem because the quality of the data is terrible, or we don't collect data, or our case management system is a problem. That can be solved within 3 to 6 months. What takes time is the changing people's mindset and using data to penetrate daily operations of the office and daily thinking about how to do the work in the office. And one of the points that I missed earlier is like managing our own expectations, managing funders' expectations, and managing community expectations in some ways is pretty important. You do know that there are a growing number of funders interested in supporting this line of work. And you hear sometimes, I have 1 year to do this work. You have to design, implement, and then evaluate. And we should have the results. And we do know that, especially with prosecutors, that is very, very hard, especially in offices where there is no history of collecting data or partnering with researchers. Because that's something that we learned really hard. Sometimes when the people get overwhelmed by either work that we are posing on them or the results of our work, it's good to step away, give them the breathing room. It's just every time you have an argument, if you ever have an argument, just give people some space and then come back when they are ready to hear more. So I think sort of, I'm not saying that we're psychoanalyzing anyone, but sort of having the sense how much you can push at a given time is very important. So with that, we have developed 8 little strategies how to improve the sales pitch to the office. And I'm going to go one by one. Some of them, Jason, you have already mentioned. Please, I'll stop every now and then and see what you can add based on our experience in the office. So the first thing is emphasizing goals. I think you can never overestimate the importance of showing why it's important, why transparency is important, and how we cannot go on with sort of prosecuting the cases we used to without thinking about the impact we're having on the communities. I think the goal is to improve the overall office. So at the end of the year, when people go back on vacation or holidays, they feel good, not only about their individual decisions on unique cases, but how well the office has done to handle the crisis, especially in times of crisis like such as COVID. So I think that do the best possible work and emphasizing the goals of the new initiative, and sort of repeating this multiple times for sure. The second component of this is creating the sense of pride, saying that yes, there are more than 2,300 prosecutorial offices in this country. Most of them will probably never get the opportunity to be part of the initiative, data-driven initiative, where we put not a dime into it, but we have the funder interested in improving our work and helping our communities, and that is an important initiative to be a part of. It's also an important movement, a transparency movement that you want to be a part of. If you're not a part of that movement, the time is not going to work in your favor. And I think that's something that can be explained to the line prosecutors as well as mid-level managers.
Basiki, if I could jump in on just that one topic, the sense of pride piece. When you look at the people that become DAs, and you look at what district attorneys' offices pay their line prosecutors or even veteran prosecutors throughout the country, it is not a ton of money, right? It is some of the hardest work that you will ever do. And so it's a calling. And so there is a sense of pride. There is a sense of teamwork that exists, and working with PPI helps us create not just this idea that Jason Williams is doing something different in the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, but all of the District Attorney's Office is involved in monumental, exponential change in the way that we are handling cases. And it makes them a part of what I think there was Reconstruction, there was a civil rights movement, and there's this criminal justice reform movement that is occurring right now. And it can't occur without transparency. So being someone out of law school for 5 years and actually playing a role in it that you can articulate does develop a very real sense of pride and help with recruitment.
And the other Basiki, in touching there, it's the planning. It's not necessarily the plan. Is by creating that team effort, putting forward, here's what we're doing, and we want to look at things. It gets so much more buy-in. While at the same time, I think the point is it does take time. But Jason, I think you've been able to do a lot in a shorter period of time, and likely it's because you've had a framework.
Absolutely.
Next point is to convey urgency, that time is now to think critically about how we can improve our work, because communities demand change and demand greater openness and transparency. And we've seen this across the country. We've seen across the jurisdictions where we thought that the so-called progressive prosecutors would not be able to maintain their jobs. I think the idea of the transparency and data and openness and being genuinely concerned about racial justice still resonates very much with the communities, despite the COVID taking all our lives. And I think the urgency has to be communicated over and over again. The next point is one that I like the most, probably. Empower prosecutors at all levels by emphasizing that prosecutors across the office have an opportunity to identify problems and help shape solutions instead of simply processing cases. So it's no longer going to be the top to bottom approach where all the decisions are made in your office. We want to hear from the line prosecutors who can meet with the PPI teams and can think critically about how together we can build a better office. The next one will be very practical, appeal to funding needs. We do know more and more offices rely on external funding from the feds, for example, to sustain the work. And what are some of the requirements of those proposals? Is developing the performance measurement system. So the funders know what is being done and what is the impact for them to give the money and to continue funding you. So without building the data culture, offices have no chances of securing the funding and sustaining the funding from the federal governments. And as the local dollars are shrinking, because they are shrinking in many places, I think the reliance on federal dollars will be very, very important. So that's something that can sell on the idea of PPIs, the data skeptics who are more practical in their approaches.
Basiki, if I could just say one thought on the funding needs. The DAs that were in this post prior to me, all of them dating back to the 70s, there were little to no independent seeking of federal grants or philanthropic grants at all, and I was shocked to see that, because there was always a need for more resources, more money to do things in the office. And what we found was that lack of any basic tools to capture data. You had certain line prosecutors who kept their own spreadsheets for their own information, but there was no uniform data collection. So if one was going to apply for any sort of grant, whether it be federal or whether it be private, it would have taken days and months for someone to stop their job to actually collect that information to actually be able to even qualify and participate in seeking that grant. So it is a game changer in terms of being able to reach out for those resources.
Absolutely. So the next component is ask questions. Meet with the line prosecutors and ask questions. Meet with the division chiefs and ask questions about what they know about case processing. Simple things. How many cases were diverted last month? How does it compare to the previous months? Or how many cases we have people in pretrial detention, and how many cases were dismissed? So the simple conversations like that can help you start building that culture, because you should realize that the people have very vague understanding about the overall trends. They're very good at knowing what's happening on their desk and how many boxes they have to clean, but they have rarely the opportunity to step back and look at the bigger picture. and think about how other line prosecutors are processing similar cases. So I think, I'll give you an example. In one of the offices, where we had a long discussion about the diversion, we asked questions. So since you're talking about diversion, what percentage of cases disposed resulted in diversion last year? And the answers really ranged from 5 to 45% among 12 people of the sort of mid-level managers within the office. So it really emphasized that we need to be paying greater attention about what is the percentage of cases we're filing, dismissing, cases that result in plea dispositions, result in custodial sentences. I think some of the stats need to become part of people's understanding, and that can help sort of slowly build that culture. If you are to ask the same question a few times, next time people will make sure that they have the information before they come into the office. So the reference data in other fields, I think I don't have to add anything. Jason, your analogy from the medical field is excellent. We also talk about the engineering, the physics or academia, or etc. So I think the prosecutors have to just learn about how we think about the success in other fields and adopt the same very approaches. We're not asking anything different, or the bar is not any higher. All we are saying, think about the individual patients, but also think about what is the overall outcome for the treatment of the specific disease. And have a picture, both micro and macro level picture, and use it as an extra tool in your toolbox. Then elevate success on an ongoing basis. I think it's important that every time there are improvements in the trends, we meet people, we acknowledge their contribution, we connect the dots. So PPIs, if it becomes just a steak, but there is no carrot, it's very easy to get discouraged. Even people who are open to this idea, at the end of the day, will be discouraged to support this work. So I think highlight some of the successes that you have in the office. Work with the communities to help highlight those successes. Identify individual units that have helped you reach certain benchmarks. And that is a big part of this work, sort of balancing between sort of steak and then carrot to maximize the positive outcome of your decisions. I don't know, there are probably other strategies that may work in different jurisdictions. It probably varies by jurisdiction size, who is on the executive team, how long the office has been using data and for what purpose. That's why when we go into the office, the first thing we ask is, what kind of data you have? But most importantly, how do you use data when you come up with new policies, practices? What do line prosecutors think about data? Do they ask questions? Do they want to see something? We ask the IT people, do you get the questions from any levels of the office about specific decisions, specific outcomes? What are the most typical data questions you get? So you need to understand what is the current culture before you start building upon that foundation. And for that, I think conducting interviews, semi-structured interviews of the staff is quite important.
Basiki, that's where I was going to go and go to Jason on your one, empowering prosecutors at all the various levels, and second, asking questions. Because I'm sure as you've gone to your office, there have been, and I call it complexity without purpose. There are struggles by some of the line deputies saying, why are we doing this? An example is another office we were recently in. It was one of the senior prosecutors who's handling very difficult cases. And she's like, anything I have to do on the case, it's got to be 3 levels above me before they make a decision. And I asked that follow-up question. Well, do they ever do anything different what you recommend? And the answer was no. So I'm sure here, as you're rolling out the PPIs, have you found some things where folks are saying, yeah, we've always been doing it that way, but thank you for coming in here. Thank you for listening, and very quickly being able to address some of their needs.
Yeah, I'll say certainly from our screening division and our screening chief, otherwise known as intake in other offices, having clear goals. And this was important before PPI and is even more helpful with PPI, having a complete system. we asked a lot of questions when we came in of the people that were here. What was working, what wasn't working. And I was really excited when we started working with PPI to see them engaging with our office the same way. It just wasn't a conversation about the elected DA and the first assistant and the chiefs about what they want. It was really, I mean, the rubber meets the road with your line prosecutors. And they know the cases, they know the crime trends, and they really need to understand how leadership is thinking, but leadership truly needs to understand how line prosecutors are thinking. And PPI sort of begins in that space. And I think it empowers, frankly, I found a lot of prosecutors are very insecure. ADAs rather were very insecure about what their role was because there wasn't a clear mission. There wasn't a clear route that they saw for all of their cases. And one of the other things that I see coming out of PPI is equity across sections of court, across ADAs. As a defense attorney, you knew you might be in for a tougher road depending upon what section of court you landed in, or depending upon what prosecutor you ended up getting. And we want there to be some parity. A person charged with one offense in Section A shouldn't have a very different result from a prosecutor from Division K. And PPI helps us measure that and check that on the front end and on the back end.
And Dave, don't forget, the NOLA is one of the newest partnerships. So we're still at the very, very early stages of engagement. And so possibly it will take another year before we have more concrete conversations about changing more specific policies. So we have to build the infrastructure. Now it's all the foundational work that's happening.
And it's really great to have PPI in my first year. Right, I've got to be. The timing is really quite remarkable. I was sworn in January 11th, having this level of organization as it relates to data, as it relates to putting systems in place, because my team was expecting things to change. Right, so having PPI in when we're already engaged in an exponential change, the timing was really great.
And it's an excellent team that we're working with Mithan, Janae, and Andre. I cannot thank them enough. That's a group that not only gets the value of this work, but also is willing to roll up their sleeves and work even longer hours to make this work happen, just to help the office. I really appreciate this partnership because of them.
And Basiki, do you have a bit of a structure or a framework about what that sort of implementation calendar would look like?
Yeah.
And Jason, what kind of steps have you done, or what have you found to be particularly helpful? I love your comment saying by it starting in the first year, and you talked about folks being uncomfortable, right? I've been in a couple of offices with elections. What's my job going to be? Am I going to get to keep my job? And so that is such an excellent time for change and an excellent time for some structure. So maybe Basiki.
But in all fairness, I also have to say that you don't have to have a new DA, new state attorney to do this. I think there is a need to become better at what we do. I think if you have the mindset that, everything I do, if you have the mindset everything I do is great and I don't have to change anything and that's where I'm used to it, and why change if something is working? It's very hard to change those kind of mindsets. Given that we are the organization of 10 people, I mean, I have the great co-managers, Don Steeman, Melba Pearson, and Rebecca Dunley working on this, and with 8 other team members. We have the luxury of right now choosing where to work. We almost never sell this idea of the PPI to the executive teams right now. So by the time we partner with them, I think there is an acknowledgement that we need to do something better. So on that, we're saving a lot of energy. But then even with that, it requires all of us to sell the idea of the data transparency, PPIs, and some other research initiatives across the office. But I do encourage the prosecutors of all types and of all parts of the country to think about the research. And I'm not saying that you need to partner with PPIs, absolutely not. First of all, think about the local partnerships. Think about the local criminal justice departments in your community colleges or local universities, researchers that may be doing this type of work, invite them to the office and see if there is some synergy, if there is some opportunity to support this academic or non-academic researcher to build their career while getting free services for yourself. So sort of, you don't always have to rely on external and that sort of federal or national organizations to do this work. So that's quite important. In terms of the milestones, I think the prep work always takes about 6 months. So the case management systems are not built to easily extract data, as you know. So oftentimes we have to help change the case management systems. There are offices that are reaching out to us, they're adopting new case management systems, and they need to learn how to do, for example, disposition codes differently or some other aspects. So first we develop a working group after we do the initial introduction to the office. And the working group consists of 5 to 7 prosecutors or the policy director or communications director. Communications piece of this is very important for both internal as well as external communications purposes. And we meet on a weekly basis. In places like Multnomah, we had 2-hour meetings every week. In other places, we meet less frequently. It also depends what's happening. When there is the flood or some natural disaster happening in the place, we tell people, we want to give you the space and we'll come back to you. But generally it takes 6 months. And then we have up to 20 prosecutors we identify as part of the workshops. And we meet with the prosecutors 4 times a year. We present the data and we engage in the conversations. So when I say present the data, there are no PowerPoint slides and there is no polished presentation. We share some of the information we have for the office and we ask them to help us make sense of the numbers. Because what we have are the numbers. We don't have the results. And without their input, it's very hard to understand what we're seeing. So through that process, after 6, 8 meetings with the group, you're slowly developing the critical mass of prosecutors who are now tolerating these conversations and are not afraid of the trend line on the piece of paper.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're causing Jason some pain because I think there was something about a hurricane in New Orleans. So that's what's going on in my mind when you talk about this rollout. How are you doing on your milestones, and then how do you overcome or keep sustaining it, especially after what's happened to your office? I think a lot of what Basiki's saying, you're living this right now. How do you keep it going?
Yeah, we absolutely are. A huge part of it is making sure that you have enough bandwidth, right? That there are folks within the office who have to live and breathe this. On my first term on the city council, I went and watched a presentation, and then I went and watched another presentation. And you can do these things, and you get this wonderful binder with this wonderful information, and it costs money, and you put it on the shelf. But if it's no one's job to work with that information quarterly, weekly, yearly, then you get nothing from it, right? And so the system that's been put in place, whether it was the first all-staff virtual meeting, where it's very similar to what we're doing today. It was myself, the PPI team, having a conversation about what was important to me and having a conversation explaining what PPI is and what it is not, so that my entire office could watch us have this conversation. So we're able to debunk some myths, right? We're able to level set some expectations. And I was also able to convey some broad stroke mission and principles that I want to see come out of this work for my team members, so they can understand how I want them to use PPI. I think that idea of conveying urgency is critically important to right now. I'm a new DA, but even in DA's offices where you've got people in their 3rd and 4th terms, you've got communities asking questions about police departments and DA's offices they've never asked before. There's a certain different level of accountability and a certain amount of transparency that's never been necessary before. And so PPI is going to put my office in a place where we can present public facing dashboards. So it's not about when I give a speech, they can go on a website and look and see what our outputs are, right? And we can constantly evolve that based upon crime trends and based upon what's working and what's not working. So hurricanes come, right? Pandemics come in waves. Who knows what's up next? But having systems in place that your team understands, whether it's a 2-year ADA or a tenured ADA, it really helps us really stay on course.
Jason, can you actually say how you managed to hire research director, research analyst? Because that's not something that can be easily done. We know that.
Absolutely. So, I mean, and it's not easy in terms of what you're looking for, in terms of qualifications. There's a ton of folks out there that do the work, and they typically aren't employees in DA's offices. At the city council, we brought on Jeff Asher and his team to help us publish dashboards on jail size, who is in jails, who is getting arrested. We decriminalized marijuana, so we want to see who is having citations. And so we had some experience with this idea of, if you want to change the way that an organization is doing something, you have to be able to, as the teacher said when I was in school in math, you have to be able to show your work, right? And having a data analyst helps us show our work. I think that progressive prosecutors will have to do something that traditional prosecutors haven't had to do, which is prove that the way that we believe the office should work is going to make the public safer. And that transparency and that data analytics in real time is the only way we can do that. So it's self-preservation to some degree.
Absolutely, because sometimes you hear from the office, I mean, not every office can afford a researcher. If it's a small office, obviously, that having a full-time researcher is not a realistic plan. But in a large offices, when you hear that we cannot afford a researcher, I cannot even pay the salary of my line prosecutors, and we always tell them, you cannot afford not having a researcher because you're missing a lot of opportunities. And then slowly people really understand how many opportunities are there, including funding opportunities, and there will be many more. I think with the new administration in Washington and greater focus on prosecutorial reform and success and possible prosecutorial task force, I think there will be more opportunities to seek federal dollars.
Absolutely, absolutely, and the turnaround time from the application of the grant and putting the grant together is a lot shorter when you have an organization like PPI working with you and partnering with you.
Well, I see us close to the 4 o'clock Eastern time, and so want to say thank you to Basiki, and especially thank you to DA Williams for the excellent presentation. Your insights today were extremely valuable for any office using or tracking data and implementing PPIs. And how do you engage your staff, and how do you get things rolling? Thank you again to our webinar attendants. The webinar was recorded, as well as previous APA webinar materials and recordings, and they're available at no cost on our APA membership website. We will also be notifying you via email where these materials become available and how you can access them through a free temporary membership. If you have any questions or concerns, please email us at webinars@apainc.org. Thank you for attending, and please continue to work to keep us all safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Basiki.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Be safe, guys.